Hello students, welcome to the channel. In this video, we'll look at the history passage of the reading section of the April 2021 SAT. This is passage 4 of the test. So let's begin. This passage is adapted from a speech delivered in 1961 by Albert Luthuli, Africa and Freedom, copyrighted by the Nobel Foundation. Luthuli was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in the struggle against apartheid, a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination in South Africa from 1948 to 1991, the year it was abolished. In years gone by, some of the greatest men of our century have stood here to receive this award, men whose names and deeds have enriched the pages of human history, men whom future generations will regard as having shaped the world of our time. No one could be left unmoved at being plucked from the village of Groutwil, a name many of you have never heard before and which does not even feature on many maps, to be plucked from banishment in a rural backwater, to be lifted out of the narrow confines of South Africa's internal politics and placed here in the shadow of these great figures. So Luthuli begins with kind of underscoring the importance of the Nobel Prize, that it has been awarded to some of the greatest statesmen, leaders of the world. And he presents himself as a humble man before these figures. He comes from the village of Groutwil, which is not a village many people have heard of. And he has been plucked from banishment in a rural backwater, taken out of the narrow confines of South Africa's politics and been brought to this global stage. This award could not be for me alone, nor for just South Africa, but for Africa as a whole. Africa presently is mostly deeply torn with strife and most bitterly stricken with racial conflict. How strange then it is that a man of Africa should be here to receive an award given for service to the cause of peace and brotherhood between men. There has been little peace in Africa in our time, from the northernmost end of our continent, where war has raged for 7 years, to the center and to the south, there are battles being fought out, some with arms, some without. Ours is a continent in revolution against oppression, and peace and revolution make uneasy bedfellows. There can be no peace until the forces of oppression are overthrown. So Luthuli presents himself as a symbol. Remember that this speech was delivered in 1961, at the time when the effect of colonialism was declining in Asia and Africa, but where problems still existed, and the transfer of power from colonial rulers to local administrations was fraught with uncertainty, violence, right? So Luthuli says that, his presence here is not just as a representative of South Africa, but for the entire continent of Africa, which has suffered uh, the bane of colonial conquest, which has suffered under a colonial rule, and where the fight for freedom continues. The many wars being fought, many non-violent struggles being waged. And one thing that is important is to recognize that lasting peace can only come when this sense of revolution that is permeating the continent ends, and that will only end when oppression in the form of racial discrimination, the kind that was prevalent in South Africa under apartheid, only when oppression is finished can peace have a chance. Our continent has been carved up by the great powers. Alien governments have been forced upon the African people by military conquest and by economic domination. Strivings for nationhood and national dignity have been beaten down by force. Traditional economics and ancient customs have been disrupted, and human skills and energy have been harnessed for the advantage of our conquerors. In these times, there has been no peace. There could be no brotherhood between men. So here Luthuli expands upon the idea of the previous paragraph, that one reason peace is missing from Africa is because the rulers of Africa, the colonial rulers of Africa, have ruled under a system that has left very little for the local man, for the local African. His traditional livelihood has been taken away from him. His customs have been disrupted. His dignity has been questioned. And overall, the potential of the continent has been used to serve the colonial powers and not the local population. And so peace is not present. There is no peace. But now the revolutionary stirrings of our continent are setting the past aside. Our people everywhere from north to south of the continent are reclaiming their land, their right to participate in government, their dignity as men, their nationhood. Thus, in the turmoil of revolution, the basis for peace and brotherhood in Africa is being restored by the resurrection of national sovereignty and independence, of equality and the dignity of man. So here he says that because of the revolutions that are going on in different parts of Africa, there is hope that peace would emerge. And even though peace and revolution are strange bedfellows, as Lutili says, the basis for peace is these revolutions, because these revolutions would end the oppression that has been America's fate for decades. It should not be difficult for you here in Europe to appreciate this. Your continent passed through a longer series of revolutionary upheavals in which your age of feudal backwardness gave way to the new age of industrialization, true nationhood, democracy, and rising living standards, the golden age for which men have striven for generations. Your age of revolution, stretching across all the years from the 18th century to our own, encompass some of the bloodiest civil wars in all history. By comparison, the African Revolution has swept across 3/4 of the continent in less than a decade. Its final completion is within sight of our own generation. Again, by comparison with Europe, our African Revolution, to our credit, is proving to be orderly, quick, and comparatively bloodless. So here, literally presents a comparison with how Europe itself came out of the age of darkness, the medieval age of darkness, into the age of enlightenment, through the Industrial Revolution, through the flowering of democracy, through the rise of the nation state. And he says that that process took over 100 years, took more than a century to realize, and it was a bloody process. It was a process that led to wars and conflict. And in comparison, the revolutions in Africa, the revolutions against colonial rule, have taken a little over a decade and have covered nearly 3/4 of the continent. And they have been relatively bloodless in the sense that since, in terms of the time span of the revolution, since the African Revolution is much smaller in time span, the revolution is bloodless. Of course, we know that this hope was not entirely realized because Africa continued to have problems even after a transition to democracy. There were dictatorships that rose in different parts of Africa. There were leaders who were local, but who were not committed to the people. So those problems did happen. But at the time when Lutili spoke, the hope was that the local man would take reins of the government and it would lead to a better state of affairs. There is a paradox in the fact that Africa qualifies for such an award in its age of turmoil and revolution. How great is the paradox and how much greater the honor that an award in support of peace and the brotherhood of man should come to one who is a citizen of a country where the brotherhood of man is an illegal doctrine, outlawed, banned, censured, proscribed, and prohibited, where to work, talk, or campaign for the realization, in fact and deed, of the brotherhood of man is hazardous, punished with banishment or confinement without trial or imprisonment, where effective democratic channels to peaceful settlement of the race problem have never existed these 300 years, and where white minority power rests on the most heavily armed and equipped military machine in Africa. This is South Africa. So in this paragraph, literally brings out the paradox of being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work against apartheid when he comes from a country where the idea of the brotherhood of man is not realized because there is a white minority that rules with a heavy hand over the black majority. And if you were to work against this institutionalized system of racism, then you would be put to jail. You would have to, you would face punishments of the highest order. And so the race problem, which exists in South Africa because of apartheid, it is a paradox, a pleasant paradox, but a paradox nevertheless, that a man from that country is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay. Even here, where white rule seems determined not to change its mind for the better, the spirit of Africa's militant struggle for liberty, equality, and independence asserts itself. I, together with thousands of my countrymen, have in the course of the struggle for these ideals been harassed and imprisoned, but we are not deterred in our quest for a new age in which we shall live in peace and in brotherhood. So here he kind of brings back the idea of a pan-African identity in relation to what is happening in South Africa. And he says that this idea of self-rule, this idea of being able to have a democratic institution or democratic institutions that are truly democratic, that represent the will of all people and not just a small minority. That idea is a powerful idea for which me and my countrymen are going to fight. So that was the passage. Let's look at the questions now. Over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts from an acknowledgement of the significance of an award to a discussion of the struggles to achieve the ideals that the award represents, a reflection on the merits of an award to an assessment of why that award was given to a particular individual, an expression of appreciation for an award to an examination of the obstacles that had to be surmounted to receive that award, an affirmation of the purpose of an award to a consideration of the likely impact that the award will have on the people of a continent. So I don't think C and D are correct because C and D, the second part of both options, presents the award as like a central pillar of Literally's speech, and that is not correct, right? He doesn't talk about the obstacles that had to be surmounted, and he also doesn't talk about the impact of this award, right? He presents the award as something which is well received, which is great, but that's about it. His focus then shifts to the challenges that Africa faces. So let's look at A again, an acknowledgement of the significance award to a discussion of the struggles to achieve the ideals that the award represents. I think that's a good point because he does start by saying that this is a significant award and the ideals that the award represents, the ideals of peace and brotherhood, that's not something that is easily achieved. So I like a reflection on the merits of an award to an assessment of why that award was given to a particular individual. So I don't think that's the focus, right? He does say that it's surprising, it's somewhat paradoxical that I get this award, but he doesn't really, he's not assessing that. He's kind of just presenting it as a paradoxical situation. So I think I'll go with A. A is the best answer. Lutterly's point of view in the passage as a whole can best be described as that of a cautious peacemaker, conventional politician, resolute reformer, harsh critic. So I don't think that he is speaking as a conventional politician or even as a harsh critic. I think his language is very measured, very neutral, so he's not harsh. He is a reformer, but is he a resolute reformer? Like, can we say that he is definitely looking at reforming the situation? He's definitely looking at bringing peace to Africa. So let's look at C again. Cautious peacemaker. He is, he's a peacemaker. We know that so if you look at the passage, he describes the the fact that, this award is being given to me because I have, there's been little peace in Africa in our time. So there is this strife, there is this conflict that he speaks about. So he's definitely there looking at that, even as he acknowledges the need for the brotherhood of man. So his peacemaking is cautious. I agree. I think I'm not going to go with C because resolute reformer would make it seem that somebody who is striving for reform without pause. And that's not the sense that the passage gives me. The passage gives me a sense of caution, a sense of looking at things in totality, a sense of, there's a sense of how peace can be achieved, but it would happen slowly, right? So I think the cautious peacemaker one is a better answer. In the first paragraph, Littley's description of the village of Groutwell primarily serves to show why he is uniquely qualified to receive the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the African people, emphasize the honor he feels in winning the Nobel Peace Prize as he considers his modest background, account for his particular view of the upheaval Africa has experienced in his lifetime, explain that he comes from a village that is typical of many villages in South Africa. So I think it's B, right? Because he presents Groutwell in a paragraph where he talks about the significance of this award, the fact that this award has been given to great people, and now that it is given to somebody of his background, his modest background, is great. It's something that brings out the potential, the power of this award. So it's B. Based on the passage, literally most likely believes the revolutions taking place in Africa are a phenomenon without precedent in Africa's history, necessary step in Africa's path to liberation, development with unpredictable results, sign of growing interest in democracy worldwide. So I think it's B, right? Because he says that these revolutions are an important step because they would set the path for peace by kind of getting out of the yoke of colonial rule, right? So let's look at 15 to 17. There has been little peace in Africa in our time from the northernmost end of the continent. So that's just describing the revolutions. 17 to 20. Ours is a continent in revolution against oppression. There can be no peace until the forces of oppression are overthrown. So I think this is a good option because it kind of relates to how this revolution is an important path to liberation. 21 to 26, that talks about how Africa got under colonial rule. So that's not the answer. And 26 to 27, in these times, there has been no peace, right? So I think B is the best answer because that gives you the idea of why this is a necessary step. As used in line 32, basis most nearly means. Thus, in the turmoil of revolution, the basis for peace and brotherhood is being restored. The basis, the foundation for peace and brotherhood, right? Because that is the foundation of peace and brotherhood. The foundation, the sort of start that is needed for oppression to be thrown out and a new path of democracy, a new path of local self-rule to be established. So it's not theory or evidence, and it's not origin. It's a foundation from which peace will begin. Okay, it can reasonably be inferred from the passage that Italy views Europe's fight for democracy in part as a campaign with an inspiring outcome, military rather than a political struggle that indirectly caused the failure of Africa's economy, quest with more radical objectives than those of Africa. Okay, so let's work with the options. I would have liked an answer which said that it was something which was more bloody, which was more prolonged, but none of those options say that. So let's work with the line numbers, line 35. It should not be difficult for you here in Europe to appreciate this. Your continent passed through a longer series of upheavals in which the age of feudal backwardness gave way to industrialization, the golden age for which men have striven for generations. Okay, 41 to 44. Your age of revolution encompass some of the bloodiest civil wars in history by comparison, right? So that's a comparison. Has in okay, and 44 to 46, our African revolution is proving to be orderly, quick, and comparatively bloodless. So campaign with an inspiring outcome, right? So I think A is the answer because he talks about the golden age for which men have striven for generations. So those revolutionary upheavals did lead to a golden age of nationhood, etc. So 35 to 39. This is the best answer. So you see the expectation from this question was that the comparison would be with Africa's own struggles, but here the focus is on how Europe's fight for democracy led to inspiring outcome. Okay, in comparing revolutions in Africa and Europe, Lutely makes the assumption that Europeans face significantly different obstacles than Africans when fighting for democracy. Europeans will share the future prosperity of a democratic Africa. The pursuit of democracy in Africa will give rise to the same social improvements as those achieved in Europe. The leaders of Europe recognize that the revolutionary activities of the African people are adaptations of strategies first used in Europe. Okay, it should not be difficult for you here in Europe to appreciate this. Why does he say that? He says that the basis for peace and brotherhood is being resurrected. Okay, so Europeans face significant, he doesn't assume that they face significantly different obstacles. It's not about sharing in the prosperity of a democratic Africa. The pursuit of democracy will give rise to the same social improvements as those achieved in Europe. Your age of revolution encompass by comparison. Yeah, I think C is a good answer because he does believe that the pursuit of democracy in Africa will lead to the resurrection of national sovereignty and to the dignity of man, which is how the European revolutions ended. So I like C. The leaders of Europe recognize that the revolutionary so D is, yeah, that's not relevant because he doesn't bring that up. Okay, then 41 and okay, 41 is a standalone question. Literally indicates that Africa's quest for democracy is in some respects more commendable than the quest that took place in Europe because revolutionaries in parts of Africa have had to fight for their rights without appropriate weapons. African patriots have been willing to sacrifice considerably more of their personal assets. African reformers have had to contend with a greater variety of geographical challenges. Revolutionary change in Africa has occurred in less time and with less violence. So it's very clearly D. By comparison with Europe, our African revolution is proving to be orderly, quick, and comparatively bloodless. So less time and less violence. Okay, which choice best describes Literally's rhetorical strategy in lines 48 to 58? Okay, how great is the paradox and how much greater the honor that an award in support of peace and the brotherhood of man should come to one who is a citizen of a country where the brotherhood of man is an illegal doctrine, outlawed, banned, censured, proscribed, and prohibited. He uses descriptive detail to convey the extent of a government's failure in leadership. He uses questions to call attention to the unsolvable issues facing a government. He uses exaggeration to illustrate the contradictions between a government's words and deeds. He uses repetitive constructions to emphasize a government's unjust practices. So I think it's D, because if you look at the way he says where the brotherhood of man is an illegal doctrine, where to work is hazardous, right? Where effective democratic channels have never existed. So there is repetition, and that kind of brings out the South African government's unjust practices under apartheid. So it's definitely D for this, right? Okay, so that was from 32 to 42. So let's grade this. Yeah, 32 to 42. Okay. So A, C, B, B, B is, oh, this is C. Okay. So 33 is C. Okay. B, B, B. 36 is B. 37 D, A, B, C. D, A, B, C. And 41 D and D. Okay. So we got this question wrong, question 33, which was about his point of view. So again, we were stuck between A and C, and I thought A was a good answer because when he spoke about peace in Africa, he was talking about how peace would not happen suddenly. It would follow these revolutions that are aimed at finishing colonial rule, right? So I thought that could justify this answer, but I think um, maybe C is the right answer because of the reason that we considered earlier, that he does talk about the need for these revolutions to happen, right? Regardless of their consequences, because these revolutions are the only way that Africa would find long-lasting peace. But I'm not sure I would have gotten this correct, even if I had looked at it more closely, because I think A could also work. Yeah. Okay, so that was the history passage. So we have finished 4 of the 5 passages in the April 2021 reading section. We are now only left with the 5th, the last passage, which is science. So I'll see you in that video soon. Make sure you check out all the other videos on this test. Take care. Bye-bye.